Hello everyone. Uh, I'm gonna talk about the report that you're supposed to do. So it's a lot of details that I want to try to do and talk about. One of the things that you need to know for the report that it's covering the concept of regression. That's a major concept in statistics, and you actually might see it in other courses too. I'll give you an example first, a simple example of what this is, and then we're gonna relate it to the actual question uh, of the report. Let's try to see if we can find a relationship between hours spent studying a week and GPA. Or basically, can you predict GPA from hours of study? So what statisticians do, they say, okay, let's bring a certain number of students. So for simplicity, I'll say it's a sample of only 5 students. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you have hours here, and you have GPA. Let's say this student studies 7 hours a week, GPA is 2.1. This student's 11 hours with a GPA of say 2.8. 13 hours, 3. 15 hours, say 3.1, and 18 hours, and say this is 3.5. Now, if you try and do what's called a scatter diagram for this, so you have your y-axis, your x-axis. Now, the question here is we're trying to predict GPA. Whatever you're trying to predict is your y. So your y is whatever you're trying to predict. And hours, in this case, is x, and this represent what's called predictor. So you're trying to predict y, GPA, from hours, x. So if you say I have 5, 10, 15, 20, and here say we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you start finding where each point is. So 7, 2.1 would be somewhere here. 11 with 2.8 would probably be somewhere here. 13 and 3 would be somewhere here. 15 and 3.1 would be just next to it. 18, 3.5 would be here. You see that they're not exactly on a straight line. The concept of regression or linear regression, that's what you need to know, is trying to find a straight line, the closest possible straight line to all these points. Now, since this here is a straight line, any straight line has an equation. And you're probably familiar with it. It's the mx plus b equation for a straight line. But in statistics, we don't call it mx plus b. We call it m is your slope. We call this b1. and B would be your intercept B0. This is your y-intercept, and this here is your slope. So this is basically what the report is talking about, is trying to predict something using something else. So this is the concept of regression, is to try and find this relationship that relates both of them together. Now, if I go to the actual report, so in the actual report, they tell you you have a company, and this company is called Delta. And they tell you that she's involved in steel wires. They're afraid of it's a Canadian company. They have a total of 20,000 workers. They're afraid of competition. They want to measure the performance of the company. And one way, they figured that one way of measuring the performance of a company is to see how many people actually have sick leaves or skip work for one reason or another. So they determined that, well, the higher education, when people are very educated, they tend not to leave work. They love work and they don't skip a lot of days. So what they did, they brought a sample of 20 employees. Selected from the company. The 20 employees, they measured hours of education. They call it hours of education. And if you read the description of what the hours of education is how much they are educated in terms of company education. They say hours of company education. And you have sick leave or days of absence. And they tell you you have 24. Someone had a 24 hours of education, only skipped 5 hours. 16 only skipped 4 hours. 48 skipped no, and you have all kinds of information. They want to see if there is a relationship between these two. Similar to what I talked about in terms of GPA and number of hours. So is there a relationship? And also, can you predict sick leave from number of hours? And as I told you in the beginning, whatever you're trying to predict, we consider this to be Y. If you're trying to predict sick leave, then this is your Y. And you're using hours of education, then this would be your X predictor. So you're gonna see if there is a relationship between the two. You want to see how good the relationship is. You want to see if there is an equation, mx plus b or b0 plus b1x, like a linear straight line equation between the two. And we're going to do this in Excel, and I'm going to talk about it. Now, in the report, there are a certain number of steps to follow. You're given 2 different examples of what the best way to do a report. He gave you 2 different examples. They're both in the Brightspace. I'm gonna stick to the example 2. because I think it's, in terms of design, it served the purpose of, or what I find it easier to stick to this form in order to do the analysis. I'll talk about it in more detail in part 2 of the videos. Unfortunately, there will be a lot of parts to this because there are a lot of technicality involved. So I'll talk about it in part 2.